Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the TDS Valiant and watched the stars through the massive viewing window. 50 years ago, humans had never traveled beyond their own solar system. Now they lived on 12 different worlds scattered across space like seeds in the wind. The Terran Defense Fleet was humanity's shield against the dangers of the galaxy. But Morrison knew they were still just newcomers in an ancient and dangerous universe. Dr. Lisa Chen worked in her secret laboratory aboard the research vessel, TDS Newton. For 3 years she had been studying pieces of alien technology captured during border fights with the Zephyrian Empire. The aliens used energy shields that worked on quantum frequencies, and Chen believed she could turn this knowledge into a weapon. Her project was so secret that even Admiral Morrison did not know all the details. Only a few people in the entire fleet knew what she was really building in her lab. Captain Ryan Torres commanded the battle cruiser TDS Guardian and managed tactical operations for the entire fleet. His job was to coordinate between 15 heavy cruisers and 40 destroyers when they needed to fight as one unit. Torres was known throughout the fleet as a brilliant tactical mind who could see patterns in space battles that others missed. He spent his days running combat simulations and preparing for threats that might never come. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled this part of the galaxy for over 1,000 years. They controlled more than 200 star systems and had made slaves of dozens of alien species. Emperor Vexthul was over 3 centuries old and had never lost a major war. His empire was built on fear and overwhelming military power. When the Zephyrians told other species to surrender, the smart ones did not argue. Grand Admiral Korthon was the greatest military commander the Zephyrian Empire had ever produced. He had won battles across 50 star systems and conquered entire civilizations. When Emperor Vexthul decided that humanity was growing too powerful and needed to be destroyed, Korthon was the obvious choice to lead the attack. The Emperor gave him permission to assemble the largest fleet in Zephyrian history. Commander Kate Sullivan ran the intelligence division from a monitoring station on the edge of human space. Her job was to watch for threats and decode enemy communications. Sullivan had learned to speak several alien languages and understood Zephyrian military codes better than anyone else in the human fleet. She spent long hours listening to radio signals from across the galaxy and trying to spot danger before it arrived. On the agricultural world of New Eden, 2 million human colonists grew food for the other worlds. Mary Johnson was the elected leader of the colony, and she worried about their defenses. New Eden had only a few patrol ships and some orbital defense platforms. If a real military force attacked them, they would not be able to fight back. Johnson often sent messages to Admiral Morrison asking for more protection, but there were never enough ships to go around. Colonel Pete Davis was the chief engineer for the entire Terran Defense Fleet. His teams maintained and upgraded every ship in the human navy. Davis had started as a mechanic on a small transport ship and worked his way up through pure skill and determination. He could fix anything that flew through space, and his engineers trusted him completely. When new technology needed to be installed quickly, Davis was the person who made it happen. Amy Rodriguez was the best weapons specialist in the human fleet. She could calculate firing solutions in her head, while other gunners were still programming their computers. Rodriguez had trained on every weapon system the humans had ever built, and could hit targets that other people could not even see. When the fleet needed precision shooting, they called on Rodriguez and her team of expert gunners. Lieutenant Ben Harper handled communications for Admiral Morrison's command staff. His job was to keep all the ships in the fleet talking to each other and maintain contact with the colonies. Harper spoke clearly under pressure and never panicked even when the news was bad. He had been with Morrison for 5 years, and the Admiral trusted him to handle the most sensitive messages. The emergency began when Sullivan intercepted a series of coded transmissions from deep in Zephyrian space. The messages were heavily encrypted, but Sullivan had been studying Zephyrian codes for years. What she decoded made her blood run cold. The Zephyrians were planning a massive attack on all human colonies at the same time. They intended to wipe out humanity in one coordinated strike. Sullivan immediately sent an urgent message to Admiral Morrison on the TDS Valiant. The attack would begin in less than 24 hours, and the Zephyrian fleet was already moving toward human space. Long-range sensors confirmed her worst fears. The alien armada was enormous beyond anything humans had ever seen. 3,000 warships were approaching, and they clearly intended to destroy every human world. Morrison called an emergency meeting of his senior staff aboard the flagship. Torres arrived from the TDS Guardian along with other ship captains and department heads. Sullivan presented her intelligence data, while everyone studied the tactical displays. The numbers were terrifying. Even if Morrison divided his fleet equally among all 12 human worlds, each group would be outnumbered 50-1. Dr. Chen sat quietly in the meeting until Morrison asked if she had any ideas. Then she revealed what she had been working on for 3 years. Her quantum cascade weapons could potentially turn Zephyrian shield technology against itself. The weapons had never been tested against a real enemy fleet, but Chen believed they might work if her theories were correct. It was humanity's only hope. Morrison faced the hardest decision of his life. He could spread his small fleet across 12 star systems and try to defend everything, but that would just get everyone killed slowly. Or he could concentrate his forces and abandon some colonies to save others. Neither choice felt right. Then Chen explained her weapon, and Morrison saw a third option. It was insane and would probably get them all killed, but it was better than just waiting to die. The Admiral made his decision. Instead of defending anything, they would attack everything. The entire human fleet would jump directly into the middle of the Zephyrian armada and try to destroy it before it could destroy them. Morrison knew it sounded like suicide, but Chen's weapon might give them a chance. He ordered all ships to prepare for immediate departure and told his crews to get ready for the fight of their lives. Dr. Chen stood before the emergency council and explained how her quantum cascade weapon worked. 3 years ago, when human forces captured several Zephyrian ships during a border skirmish, she had studied their shield technology carefully. The aliens used energy shields that operated on specific quantum frequencies for maximum efficiency. Chen discovered that these same frequencies could be turned into a weapon that would make the shields destroy themselves. The quantum cascade effect would start when her weapon hit a Zephyrian shield generator. Instead of just damaging the shield, the weapon would cause it to overload and explode. But Chen had discovered something even more important. When Zephyrian ships flew together, they connected their shields into networks for better protection. If one shield generator exploded, it could cause other connected generators to overload as well. The effect could spread from ship to ship like a chain reaction. Admiral Morrison listened carefully as Chen described the theory. She had only tested the weapon on single captured ships, never against a full fleet with network defenses. Nobody knew if the cascade effect would really spread through an entire enemy formation. It was possible that only a few ships would be destroyed. It was also possible that the weapon would not work at all, against ships that were ready for battle instead of sitting in a laboratory. Colonel Davis immediately began organizing his engineering teams to install quantum cascade arrays on every ship in the fleet. The work had to be done in just a few hours before the Zephyrian armada arrived. Davis's people worked frantically in the ship hangars, cutting and welding and connecting power cables. Most of the engineers did not understand exactly what they were installing, but they trusted Davis and worked as fast as they could. The quantum cascade technology required perfect timing to work properly. Every weapon had to fire at exactly the same moment, or the cascade effect might not spread correctly. Amy Rodriguez gathered the fleet's best gunners and explained what they would need to do. The targeting calculations were incredibly complex and had to be done in seconds while under enemy fire. Only the most experienced weapons officers would be able to handle the pressure. Lieutenant Harper worked at his communications station, coordinating between all the ships in the fleet. Reports were coming in from the outer colonies as Zephyrian scout ships began probing human defenses. The alien fleet was moving faster than expected and would arrive several hours ahead of schedule. Harper had to organize evacuation efforts on the most vulnerable worlds while maintaining communication discipline throughout the fleet. Captain Torres studied the tactical situation and realized that conventional naval strategy would not work. The human fleet was outnumbered 45-1 and could not win a normal space battle. Torres began calculating jump coordinates that would place the human ships in the exact center of the Zephyrian formation. It was the opposite of everything he had learned in military academy, but it might give the cascade weapons their best chance to work. Dr. Nancy White treated crew members who were suffering from stress and fear as news of the approaching battle spread through the fleet. Many people believed they were about to die in a hopeless fight against impossible odds. White moved from ship to ship providing medical care and trying to keep morale up. She knew that frightened crews would not fight effectively when the time came. Chaplain Steve Adams held services throughout the fleet for people who wanted to pray before the battle. Adams had served in the military for 20 years and had seen many dangerous situations, but nothing like this. He tried to give comfort to crews who might not survive the next few hours. Adams also prepared himself mentally because he knew he might die alongside the people he was trying to help. Chen ran final tests on the quantum cascade arrays from her laboratory aboard the TDS Newton. All the weapon systems showed green lights, but she had never tried to coordinate so many arrays at once. The targeting computers would have to identify and lock onto more than 200 enemy ships simultaneously. If even a few arrays misfired or targeted the wrong ships, the entire plan might fail. Morrison walked through his flagship talking to crew members and checking on preparations. 60,000 men and women depended on his decisions, and he felt the weight of that responsibility. The Admiral had never ordered a direct attack on such overwhelming enemy forces, but he could not think of any other option that gave humanity a chance to survive. He tried to project confidence even though he was not sure the plan would work. Long-range sensors detected the approaching Zephyrian fleet while it was still several hours away from human space. The enemy formation was massive and well-organized, with heavy battleships in the center, surrounded by cruisers and destroyers. Lieutenant Carol Martinez studied the sensor readings and reported that the alien fleet was maintaining tight formation with overlapping shield coverage. This might actually help the cascade effect spread more easily. As the final hour approached, Morrison gave his last orders to the fleet. Every ship would jump to the same coordinates at exactly the same time. They would emerge from hyperspace in the center of the enemy formation, completely surrounded by hostile forces. The human ships would have only seconds to fire their cascade weapons before the Zephyrians could react and destroy them. It was the most desperate gamble in military history. Rodriguez made final adjustments to the targeting computers, while her gunners took their positions at weapon stations throughout the fleet. Each gunner knew exactly which enemy ships to target and when to fire. The cascade arrays would discharge their quantum disruption beams at over 200 carefully selected Zephyrian vessels. If Chen's theories were correct, the shield overloads would spread throughout the entire enemy fleet. The human fleet formed up in jump formation, with the TDS Valiant leading the way. Morrison stood on his bridge surrounded by his command staff and watched the countdown timer approach 0. Harper maintained communication links with all ships, while Torres monitored the navigation systems. Chen watched her weapon readouts from the TDS Newton and prayed that 3 years of theoretical work would prove correct when tested in actual battle. At exactly the planned moment, Morrison gave the order that would determine humanity's fate. Every ship in the Terran Defense Fleet jumped to hyperspace, simultaneously heading for coordinates in the heart of the Zephyrian Armada. For a few seconds, they traveled faster than light through the strange dimension that connected distant parts of the galaxy. Then they emerged into normal space, surrounded by 3,000 enemy warships that were about to discover what human desperation could accomplish. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation at the exact center of the Zephyrian Armada. 67 human warships suddenly appeared, surrounded by 3,000 alien vessels in every direction. The enemy ships stretched out like a metal constellation that blotted out the stars. For a moment, both fleets seemed frozen in surprise at what had just happened. Grand Admiral Corthon stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Destroyer of Worlds, and stared at his tactical displays in confusion. The human fleet had just committed what appeared to be suicide by jumping directly into the center of his formation. His sensors confirmed only 67 enemy ships against his armada of 3,000. Corthon had expected the humans to try defending their colonies, not attacking his main fleet. The Zephyrian commander quickly recovered from his surprise and began issuing orders to his fleet. Every ship was to open fire immediately and destroy the human vessels before they could escape back to hyperspace. Thousands of alien weapons began charging their energy systems and targeting the surrounded human ships. Corthon was confident that the battle would be over in minutes. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the TDS Valiant and watched enemy ships in every direction as they prepared to fire. He could see the energy build up on his tactical screens as thousands of alien weapons charged up. Morrison knew that in seconds enough firepower to destroy a planet would focus on his small fleet, but he also knew that Chen's cascade weapons needed the enemy shields at full power to work properly. Captain Torres monitored his navigation systems and confirmed that every human ship had jumped to exactly the right coordinates. The fleet was positioned perfectly to maximize the cascade effect across the densely packed Zephyrian formation. Torres watched his tactical display update in real time as more enemy ships powered up their weapons. The aliens were giving the humans exactly what they needed. Dr. Chen watched her weapon readouts from the TDS Newton and saw that all quantum cascade arrays were functioning normally. The targeting computers had locked onto over 200 carefully selected Zephyrian vessels, spread throughout the enemy formation. These ships were the key nodes in the alien shield network, and destroying them should trigger cascade failures across the entire fleet. Chen held her breath and waited for Morrison's order. Amy Rodriguez and her gunners took final aim at their assigned targets, while enemy weapons continued charging around them. Each human gunner knew exactly which alien ship to hit and had practiced the firing sequence dozens of times. Rodriguez could see the Zephyrian energy buildup growing stronger, and knew they had only seconds left before the enemy opened fire. Everything depended on perfect timing and execution. Morrison looked around his bridge at the officers who had followed him into this desperate gamble. Torres stood ready at the tactical station, while Harper maintained communication links with the rest of the fleet. Lieutenant Martinez monitored sensors and reported that enemy weapons would be ready to fire in less than 30 seconds. Morrison knew this was the moment that would determine whether humanity survived or died. The Admiral gave the order that would change galactic history forever. All ships fire quantum cascade arrays, target designation, everything. 67 human warships simultaneously discharged their experimental weapons at the carefully selected Zephyrian vessels. Invisible beams of quantum disruption shot out from the human fleet and struck alien shield generators with pinpoint accuracy. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the cascade effect began exactly as Chen had predicted. The first Zephyrian shield generators hit by the quantum beam started to overload and explode. Bright flashes of light appeared throughout the alien formation, as defensive systems turned into bombs. But the effect did not stop with the initial targets. The quantum disruption spread through the networked shield systems from ship to ship. What happened next exceeded even Chen's most optimistic calculations. The cascade effect propagated through the Zephyrian fleet much faster and more completely than anyone had expected. Shield failures triggered more shield failures in an exponential chain reaction. Entire squadrons of alien warships began, exploding as their own defensive systems overloaded and destroyed them from within. Torres watched his tactical display in amazement as enemy contacts began, disappearing by the dozens, then by the hundreds. The Zephyrian fleet's greatest strength, their coordinated shield networks, had become their greatest weakness. The tight formation that was supposed to provide mutual protection instead allowed the cascade effect to spread like wildfire through their ranks. Grand Admiral Corthon realized what was happening but could do nothing to stop it. His fleet was destroying itself as ship after ship exploded in cascading shield failures. He tried to order his remaining vessels to disconnect their shield networks, but the cascade was spreading too fast. Corthon watched in horror as centuries of Zephyrian naval supremacy died around him. Chen stared at her instruments in disbelief as the cascade effect exceeded every theoretical limit she had calculated. The quantum disruption was propagating through the alien fleet with almost perfect efficiency. What should have been a localized weapon effect had become a fleet-wide catastrophe for the Zephyrians. Her experimental weapon had turned 3,000 warships into 3,000 bombs. The explosions spread outward from the human fleet in all directions like ripples on a pond. Massive Zephyrian battleships that had ruled the galaxy for centuries vanished in brilliant flashes of light. Battle stations large enough to carry entire armies exploded as their shield generators overloaded. Even the smallest alien fighters were destroyed as the cascade reached every corner of the enemy. Formation Corthon sent a final desperate message to Emperor Vexthal. Before his own ship was consumed by the cascade, the humans possess weapons beyond our understanding. Our fleet is lost. Do not underestimate them again. Seconds later, the mighty destroyer of worlds exploded as the quantum cascade reached the command vessel, taking with it the greatest naval mind in Zephyrian history and the pride of their fleet. In less than 30 seconds, the most powerful fleet ever assembled in galactic history was reduced to expanding clouds of superheated gas and twisted metal debris. The human ships floated untouched in the center of destruction that stretched for millions of kilometers in every direction. Not a single Zephyrian vessel remained intact, and humanity had won the most complete victory in the history of space warfare. The silence on the bridge of the TDS Valiant stretched for long minutes as the crew tried to process what they had just witnessed. Officers who had prepared themselves for death now stared at displays showing complete victory. The tactical screens that had been filled with enemy contacts now showed nothing but empty space and slowly expanding debris clouds. Not a single human ship had been damaged in the battle. Lieutenant Martinez ran her sensors over the battlefield multiple times, unable to believe the readings. 3,000 Zephyrian warships had been reduced to plasma and scrap metal in less than 30 seconds. Her instruments detected no intact alien vessels, no survivors, no functioning technology. The quantum cascade had exceeded every theoretical prediction and destroyed the entire enemy fleet with perfect efficiency. Doctor. Chen stared at her computer screens from her laboratory aboard the TDS Newton, trying to understand how her weapon had worked so well. The cascade effect had propagated through the Zephyrian fleet much faster and more completely than her models predicted. She realized that the alien fleet's tight formation and network defenses had created perfect conditions for exponential cascade propagation. Their greatest strength had become their fatal weakness. Admiral Morrison finally broke the stunned silence by ordering damage reports from all ships in the fleet. The reports came back green across the board with no casualties and no damage to any human vessel. The enemy had been completely destroyed before they could fire a single shot. Morrison had led his people into what should have been certain death and instead achieved the most perfect victory in military history. Captain Torres studied the debris field, spreading outward from their position, and tried to calculate how many Zephyrian crew members had died in the cascade. The numbers were staggering. Each enemy ship had carried hundreds or thousands of personnel, and the entire fleet had been destroyed instantly. Torres estimated that over 40 million aliens had died in less than 30 seconds, making this the deadliest space battle ever fought. Lieutenant Harper immediately began sending victory reports to all human colonies through the quantum communication network. On New Eden, Mary Johnson watched with tears of relief as the threat indicators on her screens changed from red to green. Across 12 star systems, 200 million humans learned that they had been saved by their defenders. Celebrations broke out on every human world as news of the victory spread. But the victory came with troubling implications that weighed heavily on Morrison and his command staff. Major Doug Phillips calculated that humanity had just killed more sentient beings in 30 seconds than had died in all previous human wars combined. The quantum cascade technology represented a weapon of unprecedented, destructive power that raised serious questions about the responsibility of possessing such capabilities. Chen began analyzing the cascade propagation patterns and made an important discovery about how the weapon actually worked. The devastating effectiveness stemmed entirely from Zephyrian technology choices. Their reliance on interconnected shield networks designed for maximum efficiency had created perfect conditions for the cascade reaction. Against fleets with different defensive systems, the weapon might be much less effective or completely useless. This realization brought both relief and concern to the human command staff. While humanity now possessed a deterrent against any civilization using networked shield technology, they remained vulnerable to enemies who might adapt their systems or use completely different approaches to warfare. The victory was total, but it might also be impossible to repeat under different circumstances against different technologies. Dr. White treated crew members who were suffering from shock and disbelief at what they had accomplished. Many people had difficulty accepting that they had survived when everyone expected to die. Some felt guilty about the massive loss of enemy life, while others worried that humanity had become something terrible by possessing such destructive power. White worked to help people process the psychological impact of their overwhelming victory. News of the battle began spreading beyond human space through interstellar communication networks and refugee ships fleeing the collapse of Zephyrian authority. The empire that had ruled through fear and overwhelming force for 1,000 years suddenly found itself leaderless with its greatest fleet destroyed. Rebellions broke out across Zephyrian space as subject species realized their oppressors were no longer invincible. Emperor Vex Thul received Corthan's final message and realized that his empire was doomed. The destruction of the Grand Fleet sent shockwaves through Zephyrian society that would topple his government within days. Entire star systems declared independence while his own military commanders refused orders to attack human targets. The carefully maintained image of Zephyrian invincibility lay shattered with the wreckage of 3,000 warships. Morrison ordered the fleet to return to human space while he considered the implications of what they had accomplished. Humanity had gone from a small threatened species to the most feared military power in the galaxy in less than an hour. The quantum cascade technology had given them the ability to destroy any enemy fleet, but it had also made them a target for every other civilization that feared rapid change. Chen compiled her final report on the quantum cascade effect and recommended strict controls on the technology. She argued that the weapon was too powerful for normal conflicts and should only be used as a deterrent against existential threats. The cascade arrays were immediately classified beyond top secret, with knowledge restricted to fewer than 50 people. Chen destroyed most of her research notes to prevent the technology from spreading. As the human fleet jumped back to hyperspace, Morrison reflected on how everything had changed in one desperate battle. They had saved humanity from extinction, but they had also become something new and potentially dangerous. The responsibility of wielding such power would shape every decision humanity made going forward. The galaxy would never see them as harmless newcomers again. The debris field continued expanding long after the human fleet departed, spreading the remains of Zephyrian ambition across empty space. Where once the most powerful armada in galactic history had prepared to crush an upstart species, now only twisted metal and cooling plasma marked the place where an empire died and a new age began. Word of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy with shocking speed through quantum communication networks and refugee ships fleeing the collapse of Zephyrian space. Within days, every major civilization knew that a small human fleet had destroyed the greatest armada in galactic history in less than 30 seconds. The news sent shockwaves through governments that had feared Zephyrian power for centuries. The Zephyrian Empire began falling apart as soon as news of the defeat reached the capital world. Emperor Vexthul faced rebellions on dozens of planets, as subject species realized their oppressors were no longer invincible. Zephyrian military commanders refused orders to attack human targets, and some even declared loyalty to the rebels. The empire that had lasted 1,000 years collapsed in a matter of weeks. Ambassador Laura Kim found herself suddenly overwhelmed with contact requests from alien civilizations that had never acknowledged human existence. Over 30 different species sent diplomatic missions to human space, seeking treaties, trade agreements, and military alliances. Some approached with hope, seeing humanity as liberators from Zephyrian oppression. Others came with barely concealed fear, viewing humans as a new threat to galactic stability. President Ellen Carter and the human government suddenly found themselves managing galactic politics they were completely unprepared for. Carter had been elected to govern 12 human colonies, not to become a major power broker in an ancient galaxy. She called emergency sessions with her advisors, trying to figure out how to handle humanity's new status as the most feared military force in known space. The Galactic Council, a loose confederation of older civilizations, sent envoys to establish formal relations with humanity for the first time. Council representatives had ignored human expansion for 50 years, but now they needed to treat the newcomers as equals, or possibly superiors. The invitation to join galactic governance came with conditions that humanity prove it could use its new power responsibly. Admiral Morrison faced the challenge of managing humanity's reputation as a species capable of annihilating entire fleets instantly. Some alien delegations approached him with desperate pleas for protection from Zephyrian loyalists, who still controlled parts of the former empire. Others seemed to be studying human capabilities, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. Morrison had to balance diplomacy with maintaining the deterrent effect of the cascade weapons. Dr. Chen worked with a small team of scientists to understand the full implications of quantum cascade technology. She discovered that the weapon would only work against civilizations using specific types of shield networks. Many alien species used completely different defensive systems that would be immune to cascade effects. This meant humanity's superweapon might be useless against future enemies who learned from the Zephyrian defeat. The Terran High Command met an emergency session to decide how to handle requests for quantum cascade technology from dozens of alien governments. Every species that had suffered under Zephyrian rule wanted access to the weapons that had destroyed their oppressors. Chen strongly recommended against sharing the technology, arguing that it was too dangerous to spread and might eventually be used against humanity itself. Captain Torres found himself studying intelligence reports about potential new threats emerging from the collapse of the Zephyrian Empire. Several powerful alien factions were attempting to claim former Zephyrian territory, and some seemed hostile to human expansion. Torres worried that humanity might have to fight new enemies who would be prepared for cascade weapons and might have developed countermeasures. The economic effects of the victory spread throughout human space as trade requests poured in from alien civilizations, eager to establish commercial relationships. Species that had been forbidden to trade with humans under Zephyrian law now offered valuable resources and technologies. The human economy began expanding rapidly as new markets opened. Across the galaxy, Mary Johnson on New Eden watched as her agricultural world became a destination for alien refugees, fleeing the chaos in former Zephyrian space. Thousands of non-human civilians sought safety in human territory, trusting that the species that had defeated the Empire would protect them. Johnson had to organize refugee camps and figure out how to feed populations from dozens of different worlds. Morrison and his senior staff realized that humanity had gained more than just military victory. The destruction of the Zephyrian fleet had made humans the unofficial protectors of this entire sector of the galaxy. Dozens of species looked to them for leadership and protection, while others plotted to destroy them before they became even more powerful. The responsibility was overwhelming. Chen presented her final recommendations about quantum cascade technology to President Carter and the Defense Council. The weapons should remain classified with knowledge restricted to essential personnel only. The technology was too dangerous to use except in cases of species survival, and too powerful to share with other civilizations. Humanity would have to bear the burden of possessing ultimate weapons alone. In the final scene, Morrison stood on the observation deck of the TDS Valiant looking out at space that seemed different now. The stars held new meanings and new dangers. Captain Torres joined him and they discussed how humanity had gone from threatened newcomers to galactic superpower in 30 seconds. The victory had saved their species, but it had also changed them in ways they were still trying to understand. Torres pointed out that every other species in the galaxy now saw humans as either potential saviors or existential threats. There was no middle ground anymore. Morrison nodded and reflected on the weight of responsibility that came with such power. They had proven humanity could defend itself against any threat, but now they had to decide what kind of galactic citizen they wanted to become. The story ended with humanity standing at a crossroads they had never expected to reach. The quantum cascade technology had given them the power to destroy any enemy, but the true measure of their species would be in how they chose to build the future. The war against the Zephyrians was over, but humanity's greatest challenges in becoming a mature galactic civilization were just beginning.